Well, we have a special edition of the Ron Johnson Show today. Courtney Cronin, former Vikings, ESPN analyst, now Chicago Bears. And so when we first scheduled this interview, it was just to talk about the Bears and the Packers. Packers, odds-on favorites of making the playoffs as a 7th seed. Bears out of the playoffs. Vikings, so NFC North talk. Detroit Lions finally good. So we were looking for just good football content. And then the Buffalo Bills and Bengals game happens. And as a former player, it's one of those things that throws you off because you don't really know how to react. You don't really know what to say. And you look at players across the world, you look at teams across the world, you look at sports in different countries even that heard about it and see this happening. For people to continue to talk about like, oh, players get hurt all the time. And so this is not a get hurt like Mike Utley. I heard that comment, and I was a Detroit kid, so I saw Mike Utley get paralyzed, and that was a traumatic experience, as well as a football player seeing a player get paralyzed, but then he gave us the thumbs up. And so in that moment, you're like, okay, yeah, it's the worst injury ever. Paralyzed. We don't know what's going to happen, but he did give us a thumbs up, so at least we knew he was okay in the moment. He understood what was going on. He knew what he had signed up for, and he was trying to give the thumbs up to his teammates to go, continue to play. But Damar Hamlin didn't do that. He wasn't able to give a thumbs up or to shake hands or to get carted off as players. We've seen gruesome injuries, but we always see that scene of the players following their player to the ambulance or off the field. Everybody's sad, tears, whatever, but that player's letting those players know, hey, go play for me. Damar Hamlin wasn't able to do that because he was lifeless. And so when you see guys like Ryan Clark, when you see guys like Shannon Sharp get pissed off about tweets, it's a reason for it. When my dad died in 2018, that's one of those things. I look at pictures in my phone to this day of Franco Harris, Mel Blount, Donnie Shell, Mean Joe Green. Those are iconic pictures, but I wasn't tweeting those out and sharing those pictures because in that moment I lost my dad. And I think when God created us to be brothers and sisters, if everybody had taken that time, that same amount of time to say, this is my dad, this is my brother, this is my nephew, whatever, I don't think we would have been so worried about the sports world and what was next for the NFL. And what about this game? Oh, are they going to end up in a tie? Who cares? Nobody really cares if they end up in a tie. Like, they are both winning teams. Nobody cares. Like, those players don't care about the wins and losses. And I think that's why so many former players and even analysts are kind of upset with the way some of the people have kind of brushed it aside, because this was a person fighting for their life. I look at, when we look at the Army, the Navy, our veterans, and we talk about PTSD, you see an Army vet or somebody die. This is one of those situations. This has PTSD implications for players, because that's tough to see. It's a freak accident. And so that's why we have to pray for T. Higgins and Damar Hamlin. But as I bring Courtney Cronin in the show, ESPN analyst, she covers the Bears. Everybody's been all over this story. Everybody's kind of had their takes, their thoughts. I saw yours on ESPN as well. But first off, when you saw this happen, Courtney, what was going through your mind?
You're terrified for the young man because we don't see stuff like this happen. And it's not to normalize head injuries or gruesome bone breaks and ACLs. Like, all that stuff's terrible, Ron. And you know that, like, players, it takes a long time to recover. There's a mental strain. There's the trauma that comes with getting injured in the first place. But we're not prepared for sudden cardiac arrest to happen on the field. So when you see the urgency in which the first responders are operating with, you know that it's really serious. And then, of course, the wall that players formed, kind of like linking arms and giving privacy to what was happening on the field. And we know from reports that he was administered CPR for several minutes. You just think the worst. And because we'd have not seen something like this. I know that, there was a situation between the Lions and the Bears back in 1971 when the Lions wide receiver died. Like, we think he died on the field. It might have been in the ambulance, but they continued that game on. It's a completely different era of the NFL. Not that that's acceptable at all, but my first thought watching this is cancel the game. My God, I just thought, and I know what bothers me the most about this is that the NFL is still doubling down, that they didn't say anything about a 5-minute warm-up period. Joe Buck, ESPN Deportes, Westwood One, they all said it. They didn't pull it out of nowhere. And I just think that that's the part where we're so conditioned in football with that next man up mentality that you treated this initially like another injury, because, and you can't necessarily fault the NFL. I guess, they're trying logistically. There's a lot of moving parts there. There are a lot of people that things have to go through. They're trying to take the temperature of the teams in the locker room. The smartest thing was everybody back to the locker room. Let's just debrief for a minute, but let's not cool down and get back in the right mindset the way that was at least positioned at first. Like, I remember tweeting it right then and there. This game should go from a temporary postponement to being called off, because how on earth could you possibly ask players to go back out into the arena where that just happened? You've talked about trauma and PTSD and what comes from that. That's why, and I know it really irked a lot of people apparently, and I don't even look at my Twitter right now, because the mentions on a clip that was tweeted out from me from Around the Horn the other day, where I said that there's been precedent for this before, where we've pushed games back. In no way was I equating this to 9/11 itself, but a smart person can listen to my words and understand that. But in 2001, that's when it happened. It happened after they'd moved those week 2 games to the end of the season, the week between the AFC NFC championship games and the Super Bowl. That's their bye week. They were able to push things back and utilize that. That's exactly what the NFL can do here. 15 games had to be rescheduled during the COVID season. And there's so like anytime the NFL wants to say, or at least put off the notion that, no, we must get these games played, they can move some things around. And that's all I was saying as far as week 18, because I was I was covering the Bears yesterday, and in talking with a couple players that we had available, because they did a walkthrough. We didn't have open locker room yet. The emotion on these guys they're just wearing it, because you didn't need to know Damar Hamlin to feel something about what happened to your teammate, or, a brother in arms, whether he's your teammate or not. And I think that's the thing that the casual fan needs to make sure that they realize here. Yes, you make a lot of money playing football most times. I think that's another notion that drives me nuts. People, what I've seen, like, oh, they're a bunch of millionaires. We're not canceling work if my family member dies, or if somebody that I know has cardiac arrest.
Right.
It's a violent sport. Yes. Do they know what they sign up for? 100%. Do they expect to go out there and have sudden cardiac arrest or some freak sort of accident like that happen that shakes everybody to their core? No. So I thought, honestly, of all people, Aaron Rodgers is the one who said it best when he was on Pat McAfee's show the other day. Why can't we all just take a beat for a minute and step back from this instead of rushing right into week 18 prep? That's what I was getting at, because I think there is the need to process and reflect. And if you don't do that, if you are still thinking about this when it's front of mind and it's not processed and sorted out, you're going to not be playing in the right frame of mind, which opens up the risk to even further injury. If you're playing football in a timid mindset, or if you're not fully locked in, you might not remember your fundamentals and your technique when you're trying to make a tackle, and you might be playing too high or leading with your head, like all things that could happen that could lead to more injuries. Because I'm sorry, like what we saw the other day is trauma. Like that's what it is. I don't understand why it's so hard for so many people to see it as that and see players as human beings and realize, hey, guys might need a minute from this. But, as we know right now, the NFL schedule is moving on for week 18. That's, I would imagine the NFL is really taking the lead here from Buffalo and Cincinnati on how they're going to process this thing through, because that game, the game that, we were all so excited about on Monday Night Football because it had so many playoff implications, that's kind of hanging in the balance. The NFL is telling everybody, go ahead and focus on week 18. And for the Bills, that's getting ready for the Patriots, and the Bengals have the Ravens. How do you expect these guys? I still don't understand it. And maybe everybody's just so much more tougher than me. I don't know, Ron, because it's just, I don't understand how you can ask players across the league after what happened to go back out there in week 18. I stand by what I said on that. And I just don't think there's any harm in taking a minute to process something that we've never seen before and going ahead and picking things back up the following week once we've had some time to digest it.
No, you're dead on. And so, no, nobody is tougher than you. Even as I thought about it, and you mentioned the Detroit Lions, my dad was unconscious, and I didn't know this. So this happened in like 1981, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to ask my mom the exact year, because I was born in 80. So I literally only remember being in the locker room by the time I was probably 6 or 5, I think. And that's also because I saw pictures of sitting on Mr. Rooney's lap. So the original Art Rooney, I sat on his lap. in the locker room. I don't know if the owners just happened to be in the locker room. It was a celebration type of deal for the Steelers. But that's all I really remember. And so my mom, we did a story for the Players Tribune about my dad. And as my mom's even going through the story about his concussions and, and some of the mental issues he had, she talked about a game where he got taken off the field unconscious, didn't wake up for a day or so later, was in a coma from a concussion, from a big hit. And they said it sounded and some people sent me articles, said he sounded like a car crash, blah, blah, in the stadium. And he loved to hit. Like that was his thing. And so even that, the Steelers played that game. He was taken off unconscious. Nobody understood what happened. They didn't know if he was going to make it. And the Steelers went about the game. But again, like you said, that was that day and age. That was a different type. There was literally a movie called Concussion because of how callous the NFL was at times with player safety and health. And so I totally agree with you. I grew up. Bart Scott, love him to death, ESPN analyst. I grew up with him. We played Little League football together. And so with Bart Scott, guy I love, I heard him make a comment even about T. Higgins. And this is what people have to understand about Bart. Bart's been this way since we were kids. I've known Bart since we were 8. Played Little League football together, ended up playing for the Ravens together. Bart Scott says something sometimes, and he doesn't always think it completely through. He always tries to lighten the mood sometimes even. And Bart hates the Bengals. We know that. And so we've seen Bengals comments that he's made, and people were upset about what he said about Joe Burrow last year. I think in that moment, Bart wasn't trying to be malicious towards T. Higgins. I think Bart was trying to say the NFL needs to change, that defenders can no longer attack a receiver. And he was trying to go that way. And then he kind of lost his train of thought, I feel like. And now, if I'm wrong, completely wrong. But I do feel like part of that, a guy standing straight up kind of feels like, well, I can't go in and attack this guy, so let me just make this tackle. And it's a freak accident. So I think that's where Bart should have went with it. It's just a freak accident. It's one of those things where a guy hits another guy, total, like it wasn't even a brutal hit. It looked like it was a normal play, and he just caught him in the chest at the wrong time. And so for all these people trying to politicize it, for all these people trying to put their own spin on it, at the end of the day, it was a freak accident that happened. 2 young men's lives are changed forever. 2 teams' lives are changed forever. And the NFL is probably going to be changed again. Like there's going to be new protocols, whether things are added to the shoulder pads, like MLB catchers. They have NOXI approved pads now. So if they take a blow to the chest from a pitcher, the catchers do because of that. Shortstops and third base, they wear them now. They wear chest protectors for that reason as well. And so it's a tough time. We continue to pray for Damar Hamlin. We hope that, because everybody's like, oh, I wonder if he'll ever play again. I don't even think people just want him to be alive.
Yeah.
Like playing again is, yeah. And here's where I go with this, Courtney. They just had a CBA agreement. And now you hear players like Dante Stallworth. You see Robert Smith, former Viking, talking about this. The NFL's vested program. So you have to play 3 years and 4 games to be considered vested into the NFL, pension, all the stuff to get the 5 years after you're done playing. And then there's like, oh, there's disability, and we'll pay you $22,000 a month, but now it's gotten lowered. But when you think about that, I know players, I'm not going to say names because they still are going through this process in court, but I know players personally that fly out to California, that do the head scans, that do the body and arm scans, and they continuously get denied disability because they're like, oh, well, this wasn't really caused from football, or how do we not know this was your high school team that did this to you? How do we not know your college didn't do this to you? How can you say this is us? And the NFL continues to delay, they deny. And then I think, honestly, they just hope players go away. Like my dad had a case, and we know when his brain was opened up and we got the results back, he had grade 3 CTE. And the NFL is saying like, oh, we don't know where that came from. Well, of course, after that, now they're reaching back out to us and, oh, we're going to reopen this case. But players shouldn't have to die for their cases to be reopened. And that's why I think some players are like, oh, well, the NFL is doing the best they can to help us out. And then other players are like pissed off because they see the real, and I see the real. And I don't go on a soapbox every day and say what the NFL has done to my dad or what I'm dealing with daily, weekly, what my sister has to deal with. But I do think it does have to change. There has to be something for players that when they leave this game, they know the NFL is going to take care of their bodies, because this is a brutal game. Not everybody gets Peyton Manning money. Not everybody gets Tom Brady money. There are guys that make, and I hate to say it like this because people are like, oh, that's a lot of money. But there are guys that only make like $2 million, but then they don't have a job after 2 years. So yeah, he made $2 million in 2 years, But then what does he do after that? Because it's not easy to just go from scratch and get a job that you think is going to take care of the lifestyle that you had for those 2 years. And I think that's what people forget. And yeah, there's financial universities, all these things, but it's not about that. But Courtney, when the CBA comes up, do you think this is something that will be heavily addressed with players' health and safety, as far as no matter how long you play, we're going to try to take care of you?
I think that that's like the part that people like are really wanting to like know if that's going to be taken care of. Because I mean, the NFL and like the Buffalo Bills and the way that they've handled this with Damar Hamlin has been nothing but support. And we've seen, you know, the toy drive, for example. Last I checked on Wednesday night, it was almost at $7 million, and that's wonderful. Like, that's not for him. That's for like the toy drive. Like, you know what I mean? So this happened in game. There's no denying it. And of course, like now you think, okay, well, first priority, make sure he can wake up from this, so to speak, because we know he's in critical condition still in the hospital and he's sedated. Make sure he can breathe on his own. Make sure he can live somewhat of a normal life. I mean, you hope for full recovery, but you also hope, like, if you can't get that, you'll take whatever you can get. And of course, like, you know, these are the type of things that people are going to be watching, because right now the only thing that matters is making sure he's going to be okay. In the years after this, it's the watch. You got to be critical with the watchdog eye on, is the NFL living up to, you know, all they said they'd promised to do for this young man, and paying for, you know, medical bills, paying to make sure, like, his not that this matters, but his football career could be over. You know, something that, like, is like you were saying, like, this is something he'd been working for his entire life. And he's, you know, 2 years in, he started 14 games this year for them, you know, had a really big role after Micah Hyde went down. Like, you know, he didn't anticipate going out there and having this happen to him, and that his, you know, career could potentially be gone like that. So how is the NFL going to support him as he makes that transition? If indeed he can't play football ever again, which again is not the important part right now, but when you think long-term about what is going to come out of this, what is going to come for the CBA. And I think a lot of it has to do with protecting players long after they're not providing entertainment for the league anymore.
Right. Yeah. And you're right. I just went to his GoFundMe page. It's $7.1 million. It goes to the toy drive. And so I know there's been some misinformation even there. I'm amazed at the people that tweet misinformation and then refuse to delete it because they're like, oh, well, this is what I meant. Just delete it. Like, there's nothing wrong with deleting a tweet. Say what?
A lot of strange people on Twitter.
Just delete it. Like, yep, it was misinformation. I am not afraid to delete a tweet. I delete, and then people do, oh, why'd you delete it? Hey, because I was wrong. Like, I shouldn't have tweeted it. I was completely wrong. I didn't understand the situation at the time. But last one on this is before we move on to the Bears and Vikings, which, you know, it's even tough to even talk about that and make that even matter at this point. But when you look at Damar Hamlin and you look at the Buffalo Bills, you look at the NFL, and like you said, like they hope to come to a conclusion. But this is where I go. You look at Ryan Shazier, you look at even Antonio Brown, and his wasn't like he's quote unquote okay, like he's crazy, but he's okay. But when you look at those situations, even Antonio Brown's going to need health issue like checkups yearly as he gets older. Ryan Shazier gonna need something because like now this age, the money's there. But when you get into your 60s, like these guys are gonna need help, and that's where I think the NFL, honestly, and these are owners, and I hate to say this, I think they're scared to put a precedent on stuff like this because then they're like, well, how many guys are going to be on the hook for to take care of for life? Like these guys are making you guys billionaires. They should be able to be taken care of. And I think that's what they forget, that this is not something like, and again, that's why you see so many players tweet, I feel dehumanized. I feel this, I feel that, because you feel like a piece of meat. Like I remember going to the combine, having to take all my clothes off and walk across the stage in my underwear. And, and then I see somebody tweet, hey, this is some slave trade thing. And then you see a guy, and I'm not going to use names, but former Minnesota Viking that tweets like, oh, so this is slaves now. I guess, whatever, like slaves get to play on Sundays. It's like, whoa, what? Like stop trying to like defend the NFL and sometimes just understand how some guys feel. And I think that's the problem, is so many people are so quick to defend and so many are so quick to attack, and we never listen. If people would listen, they would have understood why so many people were mad about the tweets from Damar Hamlin in the situation. But we'll move on. Courtney, you do a great job, by the way. I'm super proud of you. I get to tell people I used to work with her. I sit down at a desk with her. We had inside jokes when we didn't get to finish our segments, like the best ever. So now that you covering the Bears, and I saw you tweet this too, the Vikings are possibly going to win 13 games this season, and you now moved on to the Bears. Do you have a little bit of buyer's remorse when you look at like what the Vikings are going through and what the Bears are going through this season?
Not at all. I'm in Chicago, Ron. Like, like with all due respect, I love Minnesota.
Yeah.
I do. I think about it all the time. It's an awesome place. I'm in the number 3 market in the country. I'm good. And I'm home. Like, that's the reason that, like, I took this job. I'm home. Like, my family's here, and I don't have to get in a car and drive 6 hours to go see my parents.
True.
And my parents are up there in age too. And, I've been in a career path. I've been on a career path for the last, 10, 12 years where you've been trying to get to one destination and be able to put roots down. So for me, that's the motivation that was the motivation for me in getting here to begin with. But no, I mean, I think it's awesome to get to see what's going on in Minnesota this year after, I covered like the end, like, 5 years of Mike Zimmer and that franchise, and knowing that it couldn't continue where it was going, like, to see what they've been able to do, to see that their plan to go about this with the competitive rebuild mindset that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah mentioned back in, was it like March? It's cool to see it work out, but in no way, shape, or form am I thinking, man, I should have stayed on the beat. I mean, like, as a journalist, you don't think about things like that. Like, is it cool to cover Super Bowls? Is it cool to cover playoff games? Yeah, I've done both. So I'm not pressed about that at all, but I think it's really neat when I get to talk about the Vikings on a national stage now. I mean, I've done it a lot on Around the Horn. I did it last week on First Take. I mean, that's cool to me because, when you have a team that you had ties to and that you covered for so many years, to get to talk about that expertise, like, on a national stage is something that I didn't get to do before. So that's cool.
Yeah, so I have to make sure too, because I know I'm doing something with Spice this summer out at his house. So I have to make sure we either meet up or get you out there with Lauren Screeden or something, all hang out or something. But so Courtney, looking at the Bears as a team facing the Vikings, looks like they're going to start. Not looks like they're going to start Nathan Peterman. They have a lot of guys. Sounds like they're not going to play now. Do you think that, not to say they're tanking, but do you think that because they know they're out of the playoffs, players' health and safety, let's get to the offseason, do you even think that they're truly, I mean, because we know what Nathan Peterman is. He can make some throws here and there. He can win some games if he needs to. But do you feel like this is going to be one of the ugliest games when you look at the Vikings offensive line, health issues, making sure Kirk Cousins doesn't get hurt, or making sure Justin Jefferson doesn't get hurt playing the playoffs? What do you make of this game?
From the Bears' perspective, this is what I expected. Even though, so like, I'll give you a timeline of the field stuff. So he hurts his hip, his right hip on like it was on the first drive, or either first or second drive. And I see him on the sideline in the first quarter getting the Theragun. Like, the trainers are like massaging and trying to like manipulate his hip a little bit, stretch him out. He was on the table. He had his tablet. And then he went into the medical tent before halftime. So it's like, okay, something's going on here. He played through it, which was kind of questionable to begin with because the team's down by 4 touchdowns late in the fourth quarter, and the starting quarterback is still in the game. And of course, the coaching staff and even Fields kind of reiterated the same stuff of like, oh, it's experience, in-game reps, nothing like it. And after the game, Matt Eberflus said that if healthy, Justin would play. He kind of walked it back on Monday because, like, he was asked, well, you said Justin's going to play. Is there anybody else that you're considering either like playing or not playing? And they were talking about, well, it's ongoing conversations about everybody, including Justin. So that opens the door right then and there. Like, he's probably not going to play because Matt Eberflus said, Ryan Poles, to me, the way I looked at it is Eberflus said one thing on Sunday. Poles probably got in there and said, let's slow our roll on this here. Like, I understand from a coaching perspective, you want to win games. It's important. What's best for the Bears right now is not to win this game because they put themselves in better position. Of course, they're going to have to rely on Houston beating Indianapolis. But if they want that number 1 overall pick, which they're in line to get this week, if Houston loses and they lose too, like, the best thing to do is not to play Justin Fields. So I was not surprised at all that on Wednesday he pops up on the injury report with a hip and he was DNP. And we find out before that, because they had a walkthrough, that he wouldn't be playing. And it's the right move. I think that they should have done this. I was fine if they wanted to play him and get him experience like in games. That's cool, but he didn't need to be playing when the team's down by 28 points late in the fourth quarter. I thought that was bordering on the line of negligence. But what we know right now is it's going to be a game that lacks a lot of starters for the Chicago Bears. I mean, they just put 2 offensive linemen, including their starting right guard, on injured reserve. One of their key special teamers went on injured reserve. You've had guys like really the onslaught of injuries since week 10, week 11. Every week there's something where a guy's getting put on IR and you're having backups play and role in different roles. And it's not going to be a pretty game by any stretch. But I think at this point, the Bears have an eye on the future, which is a wise thing to do because this offseason is going to be busy from free agency to the draft. And if you can improve your draft positioning, it's a smart thing to do. But I will say, like, it's not like they made this injury up. Like, he had a hip injury in the game. It was the first question that came out of my mouth was, what happened? We saw you go to the medical tent, and he said that it was on a rollout play. His hip kind of got twisted. So, I mean, there's validity to it. I just think that there's some Bears fans who wonder, well, he was, playing through a shoulder strain earlier, separated shoulder earlier. How come he could play through that, but he can't play through this? It just kind of feels like, they have picked and chosen certain things to latch onto as far as like, well, this is what we're going to do with Justin. This is what we're doing with everybody else. Like, but then again, at this bottom line, they made the smart move by not playing him because it not only protects the health of your quarterback, which is super important, but also being able to think about the long term. And if you can improve your draft positioning, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I totally agree with that too. I mean, at this point, 18th game or 18th week of the season, no chance of going to the playoffs. Getting hurt at this point is the worst because then you're not back at the start of the season, depending on how bad that injury is. Courtney, last one before we get to the Daily 3. When you look at the Minnesota Vikings, because you've covered them before, but I've seen you again on Around the Horn, all the shows talking about the Vikings, because everybody wants to talk about Kirk Cousins. Is he a fraud? Is he not a fraud? What does Kirk have to do to be considered a real deal quarterback in the eyes of a lot of people? And maybe it's just former players or people that just hate him, but it just feels like when you turn on the TV, not everybody, there's a lot of people that constantly are questioning, is Kirk Cousins real or is this just a mirage?
And like, that's the thing this year. Like, I've given Kirk a lot of credit, and I was critical on him. Like when I covered the Vikings, and I think a lot of it was just because, people see a contract and they see dollar signs and they see somebody not living up to that. It's easy to poke holes and like just because it affected the roster construction. Go back to 2020 when that extension got signed and what the things that they weren't able to do because of that. But now, I mean, anybody who's looking at this team and saying, and I mean, obviously Kirk's had moments like that stuff is never going to go away. I mean, he is who he is at this age, 33, 34 years old. And he's a good quarterback. I think being in a place where he is empowered by the head coach and the front office too, with the weapons that they have around him. I mean, my goodness, the TJ Hawkinson trade, that one seemed to, kind of came out of nowhere. And it really worked out for them just to be able to have that presence at tight end while Irv Smith had been out. Like, Kirk has not been the problem though. I mean, my issue, and this is what I will continue to harp on, Green Bay has put up 41 points on this team. This defense has a lot of issues. They've given up like routinely 400 plus yards a game. They're giving up massive chunk plays. There's no pass. Like, you think the Bears pass rush is bad. It is. Don't get me wrong, Ron. But like, think about how many defensive linemen, like where the sacks are coming from Minnesota this year.
Yeah.
Not really up front. It's not Za'Darius Smith and Danielle Hunter just annihilating everybody. So it's kind of like that to me is like the biggest concern I'm going to have with this team in the playoffs. But Kirk's already done what Dak has not done. And I said this last week. He's won a road playoff game. And think what you will about the way that game ended in New Orleans. Kirk has that on his resume. I think that I just worry about the defense letting this team down because when you have the talent to overcome all of these deficits and win scores by one game, win games by one score, that's great. Eventually, like that's a really tall ask to get teams to do that. And I just feel like they're going to meet their match in the playoffs. It might not be against the Giants in the first round, but it would certainly be in the divisional playoffs where there's going to be a hurdle that I don't think that they can overcome if their defense is playing the way that we've seen these last couple games.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Well, that's Courtney Cronin. I'm Ron Johnson, and I want you guys to remember you can now download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire. Just go to Locked On Sports Minnesota when you search in your apps. Download it. It'll be right there on the screen. Get all the videos, all the shows, and you can actually see Courtney Cronin because everybody loves to see Courtney Cronin. So make sure you download that app. You can also go back and watch the Adam Thielen interview, the Cam Bynum interview, which Cam Bynum's interview is starting to make a lot more sense now of what he said about Harrison Smith. So make sure you go back and check that one out.
Check that one out.
Coming up next, we got the Daily Three. That's myself, Sam, and Courtney. It's 3 questions, 3 minutes each. Stay tuned.
And really quickly before we get to Courtney and the Daily Three, I'll tell you about betonline.net that brings you today's show. Get all the lines, all the leagues, all the games. It's money lines, spreads, totals. The Vikings line just keeps going up. With Peterman news, now the Vikings are favored by 7.5 in Chicago, over under 43, which is down from the previous number. Check that out and plenty more at betonline.net. On your mobile device as well, it's BetOnline. It's where the game starts. All right, I've got 3 questions, 3 minutes. You guys can split the time. Now, yesterday I asked Ron about one change he wants to see Kevin O'Connell make in his second year as head coach. I want to ask Courtney about Matt Eberflus. What's one big adjustment you think the Bears need to make for year 2 to be a success?
I think it's the scheme defensively, because where Eberflus comes from Indianapolis, from Dallas, from the Rod Marinelli camp of like trying to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks with 4 down linemen. It's a scheme that typically doesn't blitz a lot. They've had to do it out of necessity this year because I think the scheme is a little bit antiquated in today's NFL. And I also think the talent gap that they have up front, like their 3 technique is a position they've got to address in the draft because they missed out on that this offseason. The edge rushers are not up to par for where they need to be. And so I think it's a combination of you got to address the defensive line first and foremost, but you also got to tweak what you're doing scheme-wise because you're just not getting pressure on quarterbacks.
Yeah, for me yesterday, I did mention the Vikings and what they need to do. And I kind of said, Kevin O'Connell, show us who you are. What is this offense? Do you need a running back? And so I feel the same way about Matt Eberflus. And so I was dead set on they don't need to draft a quarterback. And I shouldn't have looked at Twitter because now some of the Twitter analysts, ESPN people that follow the draft are saying Matt, and I think some Bears, I don't know if they're Bears beat right. I wish I was late. You look at Twitter late, but somebody actually gave me a great talking point and I should have screenshot it, but I didn't. But they basically pointed out that, and Courtney asked the question. Actually, they used Courtney. If Matt Eberflus saw enough in Justin Fields, and he kind of said yes and no.
Yes
so,
and no.
Yeah. That leads me to believe that he hasn't seen enough in Justin Fields, because if you had, you would have just went with a straight up, yes, I've seen enough. I know what I got. So I do feel like CJ Stroud and what he does in this upcoming meetings, combine or whatever, that if they can trade Justin Fields and unload him healthy, which is another reason to make sure he doesn't end the season hurt. If they can trade him off for some draft capital, not a first round pick, but who knows what second, third round picks, and draft a CJ Stroud because they have the first pick. I could see them doing that. I don't know if they would keep CJ Stroud and Justin Fields and treat it like a Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo. But what I want to see in year 2 for him to like show what he is, prove what you want to be with this offense. Like if you want to go get another receiver, go get it. Because you got Chase Claypool. You got rid of Matt Khalil. You got rid of Robert Quinn, I think is who it was. So show us who you are. If you're going to build this team around the offense like Jalen Hurts has A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, do it. Like, show us what you want to do with this offense.
I think it's Khalil Mack, not Matt Khalil. Very different people.
I was about to say, wait a second. When did that happen?
That's a hilarious mistake.
That's incredible.
But Matt Khalil, good memories.
Oh,
that was good. All right. So, Courtney, the Bears have $1 bajillion to spend in free agency. Let's say that you have the keys. You've got a stack of $100 million in front of you. How are you going to divvy up that cash in the free agency market? Just roughly based on position. I don't need names, but where is that money going to go to fortify this roster?
I mean, to Ron's point, the day that they traded Mac, that's last March, that signified that everything was going to be built around the offense. And I think that that's something that they need to like continue to keep at the front of mind. But that doesn't mean that the defense has to be neglected. Like, and to the point that I made earlier, like about, what they need to do at 3 technique. Like if you have that number 2 pick, you're good. You can get Jalen Carter because we know that Houston's not going to draft anybody other than a quarterback. But if you decide like you don't want to do that and don't want to wait that long, I mean, you could trade for DeVorest Buckner. He doesn't have any guarantees left on his contract this year. There's some others. I wrote about this the other day at ESPN.com about some like potentials that happen. I think Deron Payne's a free agent. He's had a terrific season this year. Javon Hargrave as well. I mean, there's options in free agency is what I'm trying to say to divvy up that position. You got to bring in 2 to 3 receivers, and you're going to end up overpaying because the 2023 free agent class, that group is not great. You have like Juju Smith-Schuster, Allen Lazard. You've got to do something though, because this group, and they just signed Equinemius St. Brown to a 1-year contract extension. I'm not sure really why, other than like it's a cheap thing and you can try to keep a lot of guys here to create competition. That's probably why, but that's not going to fix the room. So there's that. You gotta, I think, getting a center, like upgrading your center spot, figuring out what you're doing at right tackle, probably even bringing another left tackle in. I mean, not anything really against Braxton Jones. He's had an up and down season, which you expect for a 5th round FCS prospect, but they have needs everywhere is what I'm trying to say. Like they've got $100+ million in salary cap space. So if you have the wherewithal to pull off trades, and maybe it's even DeAndre Hopkins, because whatever's going on in Arizona right now. Kyler Murray's not coming back anytime soon. He just had the ACL surgery yesterday. And you have a roster that has some pieces that you might want to offload. I mean, that offensive line, and it's not going to look the same as it is next year. Then someone like, DeAndre Hopkins, who went there to go play for a competitive team, that has not happened since he got there. He might say, hey, I'm 30. I want out. Like, I want to go somewhere else. Trade me somewhere where I can actually, play on a team that can contend eventually for something. Because this could be a 2 to 3 year process, guys. Like, anybody who thinks the Bears are a quick fix needs to take a very hard look at the roster this weekend to show you what they don't have. Because you're going to get a front row seat to it.
Yeah, Courtney, you're awesome because you stole what I was going to say. If I had $100 million and I just bought it up with what the Eagles did with getting AJ Brown, I'm going to go get me a guy. Like I really loved, and I said this when the Vikings draft, and I got it on tape with Fox 9, I think with K-Fan, everybody. I said this years ago. I loved Chase Claypool, but with Chase Claypool, he's a positional receiver, which means he's going to give you great curls, digs, and outs. He's not going to take the top off. He's not that guy. So you got to go find that guy. Well, who's a guy that you can go deep and say 50-50, I'm going? You just pulled him out. DeAndre Hopkins. Like, if I got that much money, I'm going to utilize my trade value of guys I can get rid of. If, let's just say Justin Fields, you might have the first pick. So maybe trade Justin Fields and see if you can do Justin Fields for DeAndre Hopkins plus whatever they need, because Kyler Murray, like you said, he might not be the guy there. Like, they did pay him. And if they can find a way to unload him, which is probably not going to happen, so that's a dumb trade, but there has to be a way to do it. But when you think about that, I do say receiver. I look at Juju. I look at Allen Lazard. You got to go find some guys if Justin Fields is your guy. Even if he's not your guy, you got to get your next guy some receivers. I know everybody wish Marvin Harrison Jr. could come out this year. He can't. But that's going to be a guy that I know next year is going to be the top receiver taken. People are going to really want him. Other than that, Orlando Brown is a free agent offensive tackle. That's a tackle the Bears could get. And then from there, again, the Ravens, if Lamar Jackson, if they don't get him, then that maybe as a quarterback, that works. A quarterback that could do your system. So, yeah, if I have $100 million, I'm spending on offense because I feel like defensively, as long as you have a competent coordinator who can keep you in the top 15, you should be able to compete as long as your offense is just putting up numbers. And teams like the Eagles are starting to show that now. Even the Vikings are showing if you can put up points, you can win these games, even your defense. And their defense is not good, like Courtney pointed out. So I'm spending on the offense. I'm going to go receivers and offensive tackles and hope I can find a quarterback, whether it is Justin Fields or in the draft.
It's too bad, Courtney, that they gave up on Kyrus Tonga and Duke Shelley, who have cult followings now in Minnesota. They're like the best players they have. Here. Last one. I'm giving you $100. I just gave you $100 million. I'm taking it all away except for $100. You have $100, and you can make a wager on one team to win the Super Bowl right now. Who are you going to pick?
Ooh, I'm going to take Philadelphia. I know that they are not the odds-on favorite, and I know that the odds, I'm sure, like have changed this week just with Buffalo and what they're going through right now, because like they were far and ahead of most in terms of like the Vegas odds recently, but I am going to take Philly because I think Jalen Hurts will be rested by that point, and very clearly, I think that was kind of a nice like way to see it last week. He's not a system quarterback. Can't just plug and play whoever you want in that offense and expect them to win. So I think what you were seeing is the true MVP of the league and somebody who can carry this team. I mean, they've got the first round bye. They've got to lock up the number 1 seed in the NFC this week with a win over the Giants. But I'm going to go ahead and say it's Philly.
Yeah, if I had $100, I'm going to go with the emotional pick. I'm going to still stick. I picked the Bills earlier in the year. I'm going to stick with the Bills. And I think they have even added motivation if and when, and we pray Damar Hamlin comes out of this and he's on the sideline, not playing, but just, with the team. That's a different emotional lift that you can't create week in and week out. Like the fact that if they have to play for him every game, they're going to play for him every game. It is going to weigh heavily on them, I think, for at least a couple weeks. But as they start to get through in just normal football and he's back, and whether he's just sitting up in his bed or whatever it might be, I just feel like that's one of those movie type of situations where they're going to have an added kind of bonus of just energy of like, look, my foot hurts, but it's not as bad as what he's going through. My back is sore. It's not as bad as what he's going through. I'm tired. It's not as bad as what he's going through. It's just one of those things that emotionally, I think some people don't understand how that can really just push a team. And we know Stephon Diggs is an emotional guy. I mean, I feel bad for any defensive back that's to deal with Diggs going forward, because his mindset is no longer BS at any point, because you know how quick this can end. And if there was any time for them to really just step it up and do something special for not just the city, but their teammates, the family, everything, this is it. So I'm putting my $100 on the Buffalo Bills, and I'm gonna put another. Sam, give me 100. I'm gonna put another 100 of my own from Christmas on the Bills. But yeah, I just think they can pull it off. But I want to thank Courtney Cronin for joining me today on the Ron Johnson Show. One bonus question, because like any NFL game, it's always overtime, Courtney. My bonus question for you, Courtney: the Packers have a chance to make the playoffs. Do you feel like they're the most dangerous team in the NFC as far as wild card goes?
If they get in at 7, then yes, because you have a team that started out the season 4-8. And I think Rodgers made this comparison the other day about that 2016 team that lost in the NFC Championship game. Like, he says that he thinks this team is more talented than that group, and maybe at the running back spot. I didn't think, in looking at that roster from 16 and all the weapons he had on the outside, that was the case, but there's a lot of similarities you can draw to that group and this group. And the fact is, they've made the adjustments necessary. I mean, think about all the number 1 receivers that they've eliminated out of games for a multitude of reasons. And you can go back to Miami. You can go back to, the last week with Justin Jefferson. Like, they're going to have a big test in Amon-Ra St. Brown this week, but they're playing really good ball right now. And it's good for Joe Barry because people are ready to run him out of town. So I think that the Green Bay Packers, should they get in as a 7 seed, are the most dangerous team in the NFC playoffs, because it's Aaron Rodgers and you can't really count him out. If he gets in after all that, my money's on him.
Well, remember, people, if you want endless Vikings talk, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, where you can find all of our videos, all of our shows, instant podcasts after every game, and the Vikings press conferences delivering all the biggest news. Like our videos and leave your comments in the section below, and make sure you download the app on Amazon Fire and Roku. I want to thank you guys and have a great day.